Hey guys, hey, temperatures are starting to cool down, fall is in the air, and I thought that'd be a perfect time to talk about my favorite fall fishing lures. Now technically, some of the same lures I'm using all year round, I'm still using in the fall, but maybe sometimes we change things up just a little. Let's start out with a plastic worm. Plastic worm is really year round. You're going to use it spring, summer, fall, whatever, but I change it up just a little in the fall. We just came out of that hot July, August, real hot days in the summer, and usually that's a great time for a 10, 12 inch ribbon tail worm. Those things work so great when it's so hot in the summertime. But once we get into fall, I like to back down a little bit and just give me a plain, simple 5.5, 6 inch stick worm. That's the way I like to go in the fall. I'd kind of get away from the big stuff, move in something just a little bit smaller. I don't know, that's my personal preference. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just something I like to do. Now another change I make, when I fish a plastic worm, if you've watched any of the videos, I love a swim bait hook. That's the way I like to fish a plastic worm. I've got a keeper on the front, I got my weight here, a 1/4 ounce weight. I like that because basically, do it real fast here, when I rig up a worm and set it up weedless, that's roughly, I like it because instead of the weight up in the nose and that worm going like this when it sinks, it tends to kind of sink a little more horizontally instead of vertically, a little bit slower. To me, I think that's a little more natural, so I love a swim bait hook. Now, this happens to be what I've usually used over the summer. This is a 1/4 ounce swim bait hook. That's what I normally use. But coming fall, I'm going to go with an 1/8 ounce. Basically same thing, only an 1/8 ounce instead of 1/4. My reasoning, water's cooler, fish are shallower, I don't have to go as deep anymore. I'd like a slower sinking worm. I'm going to go with an 1/8 ounce instead of a 1/4 ounce. So it's the same lure, basically, a plastic worm that I've been using all summer, but now I make a few changes and I fish it a little differently in the fall. Another one that's about a year-round lure, and that is the jig. I love the jig. It's year-round. Basically spring, summer, fall, anytime works with a jig. I like a 3/8 ounce jig, and mine is basically just a pointed jig, a swim jig, whatever you're going to. There are so many styles of jigs. There's about as many different styles of jigs as there are ways to fish it. I go with one style only. That's what I use. I don't have 3 or 4 rods rigged up with a different kind of jig on each one. One thing I do a little different in a jig than some. First off, in the fall, I kind of go with these green pumpkins, watermelon kind of colors. In Nebraska, where I fish, in smaller lakes like this, in the summer we get a lot of algae. That water's going to turn green. We're going to get a lot of rains. That water's going to turn brown from runoff. Either way, we have a lot of dingy water in the summer. But our water tends to clear up in the fall and gets a lot cleaner. So the fish have spent all summer with that real dingy water. Now it's starting to clear up a little for them. I don't think I need such bright colors, or maybe in the sense of a dingy water, maybe I'm using a lot of blue-black in the summer to give it that black silhouette to make it easier for them to find, or the bright colors. I don't think I need that in the fall anymore. I really like to go more natural, green pumpkin, watermelon, stuff like that. The other thing I do different in a jig, and that is I don't use, see if I can take the body off just quick. I don't usually use a round bend hook on a jig. I order jigs with an extra wide gap hook. My jig has the exact same hook as my plastic worm. In my opinion, an extra wide gap hook, once it gets a hold of something, it doesn't like to let go. So I like I find them, I can order them, I paint them myself, put on the skirts, put on the trailers and everything. I just love an extra wide gap hook on a jig. That's just something for me. Another lure that can be used year-round, but I don't use it as much year-round, a chatterbait. Now I used to be a spinnerbait fisherman. Now I'd say if I'm going to do anything, I'm grabbing a chatterbait first. Early in the spring, I tend to fish this some, and for whatever reason, I start leaving it alone in the summertime. I don't know why, but I've just kind of let it go. But come fall, we're going to come back shallower fish again. They're coming up shallower because the water's cooling off. I love a chatterbait. It can be in the greens, the oranges. I love a gold blade. I put together my own chatterbaits, so I love using the gold blade. We have a lot of bluegill. That's a lot of our prey fish, and I just think that gold blade mimics that bluegill a little more than the others. Now, why in the fall? Why is this going to work so much better in the fall? Why not leave it alone in the summer? Again, they're coming up shallower. I like this because I can fish a little shallower. The other thing I have, in my lakes here, I get a lot of vegetation growing up. We'll have some areas in the summer, it's right up on the surface, and then after the heat of the summer, some of that stuff drops. There's still vegetation there, but it's just underneath the surface a ways. I love the chatterbait because I can fish in amongst that vegetation, and I'm not going to get hooked up too bad. Every once in a while you're going to jerk yourself through, but those fish are in that vegetation, and the chatterbait is something I can get in there, move through fairly quickly through that vegetation, and find fish. So I love the chatterbait in the fall when I'm fishing around all the vegetation that we've had that's built up over the summer. To go along with the vegetation, another thing I like, I'm using it a lot, and that is the crankbaits. I still love my crankbaits. I have to admit, when I got into painting my own crankbaits, really got me into fishing crankbaits, and now for me, they are year-round. But I love these in the fall. We're just going to shallow them up a little bit. Over the summer, we fish fairly deep. We got down there and we fished a little bit deeper. And let me take a minute to explain. Again, I'm in eastern Nebraska. I don't have lakes that are 50, 60 foot deep or more. I have lakes that are probably 20 to 25 foot at the deepest. So usually when I'm discussing shallow or deep, I'm talking 0 to 5 foot or 5 foot to 10 foot. Once I get much below 10, it doesn't mean much for me here in Nebraska. So I was usually in the summer, I'm down here running 8, 10 to 12 foot deep crankbaits, trying to get down as far down as I can in the summer. But now, once we move up here in the fall, the water's cooling, the fish are up. I'm now concerned with 2 water levels, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and I'm really spending most of my time now in the 0 to 5. So I basically have 2 styles of crankbaits. I have one here that's going to run about 5 foot deep. I have one here that's going to run about 2 or 3 foot deep. So again, I'm now back to what's my structure where I'm fishing, and I'm going back to that vegetation. I'm going back to work the edge of that vegetation, or with this 2 to 3 foot lure, we fished a lake not too far from here that has a big flat right out in the middle of the lake. And unless you're out in a boat and you got a fish finder to find it, the water's about 5 foot deep. And I don't know how many fish we've caught out there because there's vegetation out there that comes up within 2 or 3 feet. And Bob and I will throw one of these. Runs about 2 or 3 feet deep. Yeah, every once in a while we'll get it hung in the vegetation, but we'll pop it through. We've caught so many fish out there because a lot of people aren't fishing it, but we're running crankbaits through that vegetation, just trying to stay on the edge. And again, that's something a lot of people don't like to do. One other thing I do with my crankbaits, this one has your standard round bend hooks. Because I paint my own, I put my own together, I also use extra wide gap hooks on my crankbaits. I find the extra wide gap hook tends to hold the fish just like with a jig and just like with a worm. That extra wide gap hook, once it gets a hold of that fish, it usually doesn't let go. Now, if those fish are swiping at this lure, you're probably going to miss some fish. So you got to kind of figure out what's the day like. Are they just swiping at them? If they are, you might want to stick with the regular round bend hooks that come on every lure. But if they're smoking that thing pretty good, that's a good time. You use the extra wide gap hooks. Once they get a hold of that fish, they don't tend to let go. Now that's 4. Is there other things you can do? You know what? topwater, buzz bait. You know I love a wake bait, whopper plopper. Anything up on the surface would be great right now, just because they're back up in that shallow water. I know a lot of times we're always thinking in the middle of the summer and it's hot and we get out there before dawn, or we get out there at sundown, and that's a great time to fish topwater. It's a great time to fish topwater right now too, so I wouldn't pass those up. And one other thing, this time of year the water really clears up. We're getting a lot of clear water, that real dingy. As I said, they start to clear up a little. Don't forget a jerkbait. A jerkbait can be something that can work really well again come fall. You used it back last spring, dig that back out again before fall. That's all I got, guys. Thanks for sticking with me. Subscribe to the channel if you would. Hope to see you again real soon.